Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2017 coming-of-age drama titled Wonder. Now, Wonder runs for 1 hour and 53 minutes long. It is directed by Chbosky. It is produced by David Hoberman and Todd Lieberman. The script was written by Chbosky, Jack Thorne, and Steve Conrad. It was composed by Marcelo Zarvos, the cinematography by Don Burgess, and it was edited by Mark Lavolsi. And the stars of this movie are Jacob Tremblay, Julia Roberts, Owen Wilson, Mandy Patinkin, Noah Jupe, Isabela Vidovic, Maccie Margaret Chbosky, David Diggs, Sonia Braga, Danielle Rose Russell, Nadji Jeter, Bryce Ghiesar, Millie Davis, Elle McKinnon, Nicole Oliver, Crystal Lowe, Steve Bacic, and Ali Liebert. So, and by the way, it was also adapted from the novel by R.J. Palacio, which was also titled Wonder. I forgot to make a note of that, but anyhow, it came to me. Adapted from the novel by R.J. Palacio, Wonder guides through the year-long journey of a young boy named Augie Pullman, played by Jacob Tremblay, who was diagnosed with a disease called Treacher-Collins syndrome. So he's making the transition going from years of homeschooling to now in-class learning as he deals with the trials and tribulations kids normally deal with when walking into the classroom. And of course the issues that are faced with in-class learning, all the tropes just seem to just fall into place, from bullying to becoming to acceptance to adjusting to finally getting respected. Augie not only found his way around the classroom, but has also touched the lives of the audience and the people around him, giving us the message that no matter how different you are, we are all unique in some way, and that one's physicality should never be judged. Of course, he has to go through all the conflicts and all the pressures and all the stuff that goes on within the walls of the education system. Now, of course, Treacher-Collins syndrome results in Augie having his facial features disfigured. Now, a lot of people may have probably had complaints that Jacob Tremblay, who has a pretty normal face, was given some makeup duty to make himself look physically disfigured. But at least I'll say one thing, at least it's not over the top, it's not overkill, but it does have the same effects when it comes to storytelling. And I think the storytelling element in this movie truly works wonders. Sometimes I might compare this movie a lot to the 1985 movie Mask, which also had a person who was born with a normal face given this really, really overly done makeup look to portray a guy who also was born with physical disfigurement that also resulted in a lot of symptoms and ailments. I'm talking about, Mask with Eric Stoltz. Eric Stoltz, by the way, is also another actor who had a normal face but was given, a major makeover to look just like Rocky Dennis, and to also not only look the part, but to also, be the character. And Jacob Tremblay, let's face it, I'm gonna go a little bit more into the performances as I make my way through. Let's just say he really, really tells the story. And he is just such a bright, dynamic young man. I just hope that he continues his trail through the acting community because he's just so dynamic. He really, really pulls at the heartstrings, not just the people. I mean, he isn't playing Augie Pullman. He is Augie Pullman. And his heartfelt performance will affect not only the people around him, but even also the fans in the audience, and maybe even the performers themselves. Because he was just so incredibly believable and just so incredibly likable. You wish you can all have an Augie Pullman in your life. And that's kind of like what we get here in this movie. Under the direction of Steven Chbosky, his adaptation was handled with extreme sensitivity and succeeded by keeping the themes mature, but not over the top by way of melancholy. We don't have to go through the whole melancholy thing. Okay, that's kind of like where the weakness in the movie Mask was. Because it just, after Rocky Dennis's graduations, things just started to go downhill. But at least this movie sure has its speed bumps, sure has its sad moments, but the sad moments are actually few and far between. If we do shed a tear, it may not necessarily be a tear of sadness. It could be a tear of joy. The makeup effects by Arjen Tooten are very well crafted and are in full detail to give the viewers a visual indicator of the physical condition Augie faces every day in his life. But it's not just the physical condition that bothers Augie, he also goes through the motions as well. I mean, the fact that he looks different from everyone else is just a pure target of ridicule. People look at him and stare at him and snicker at him and try to avoid him like the plague, even coming so far as to play a game that if you go anywhere near Augie, you're going to get the plague or whatever disease and illness he has, you're sure going to get it. That's cruel. But unfortunately, in school, whether it be elementary and high school, let's face it, kids are cruel. I mean, and this is just a life lesson that Augie has to learn. And I'm not saying that as to be mean, it's a little bit of a tough love approach on my part, sure. But Augie, well, let's face it, he's got a big task at hand. Aside from the pressures of schooling, from the homework to the teachers, to the getting of the grades, he also has to go through a lot of the emotions as well. From people who don't understand his facial conditions, or maybe even sometimes to the point of not wanting to understand and just feeling that bullying and belittling somebody who you think is inferior to them makes you powerful. Unfortunately, they do that, and we don't like it. We don't want to like it, but unfortunately, it's what happens. There is just no easy way out. Augie knows this. Augie understands it. But we shouldn't let this take him off guard. Even though there are times when it does take him off guard. But somehow he still pulls himself back up and he gets back into the thick of things. Because there are people out there who do love him. He's just got that magical touch, that clinging on that people seem to gravitate towards. But Augie has to face the everyday hurdles in his life. From the sad-looking eyes, to the facial linings, to the little stubs of skin for the ears, Augie, no fault of his own, will likely have to deal with facing the cruel world, as he will be bombarded with stares, belittling, and discrimination from the way he looks. Now, people might say that this movie may have probably gone overboard with the name-calling, the stares, and the bullying, but even to be honest with you, they don't do it in an overkill approach. I mean, we're not gonna see Augie tied to a tree and get thrown mud at. No. The bullying mostly comes in a more sheer, subtle fashion in some ways. Sometimes you might hear some betraying, especially from his friend, Jack, who, in which, when Augie went for Halloween dressed in a ghost face costume, he can overhear his friend saying a horrible insult, even though Jack is completely oblivious as to, I didn't even know Augie was there when I said it. But then catches on and eventually apologizes. But then there's also a character whose name was Julian who has throughout the majority of the movie, he's been pretty downright cruel, drawing horrible, insulting looking pictures of him, writing things on the back that you would be just better off if you were dead. These things are just really, really horrible. And then in the end, when he's sitting there in the principal's office with his parents, and his parents are just as much of, are probably even more assholes than Julian. We discover that the whole cliche about Julian is that, it comes from the whole idea that bad kids come from bad parents. Well, his parents, who were sitting in the principal's office, Principal Tushman, played by Mandy Patinkin, and they're pretty much, being just as cruel to Augie as Julian. And even saying that Julian wouldn't be like this if it wasn't for Augie. I mean, what kind of fucking asshole parents does Julian have? So then in the end, Julian actually sincerely apologizes to Tushman. But of course you realize that Julian was actually let off quite easily. Instead of like a 2-week suspension like in the book, in the movie, he's only given 2 days of suspension. So he got by pretty easily. But I think that if he ends up continually living this way, or if he still has not learned from his mistakes, it could likely become 2 weeks. Chbosky, who also co-wrote the script, along with Steve Conrad and Jack Thorne, succeeded in making the viewer realize that Augie is going through the same issues as any normal kid goes through during their school years, and that his issues are actually no different than anyone else's. I mean, he's going through the motions too, and maybe people who are not born with a physical deformity also have to deal with issues of bullying, because they're too going to be judged. You could be judged for being too smart. You could be judged for being too stupid, being too short, too tall, too much of a critical thinker, not too much of a critical thinker, for talking too much, for not talking too much. Anything that you do is a call for constant, automatic ridicule. There is no escape. You're going to have to take shit in order to give a shit. And unfortunately, this is what Augie will have to endure. No fault of his own, but his motions in life are no different than anybody else's. And you don't have to have Treacher Collins syndrome to be the epicenter of ridicule. You could be a perfectly normal looking kid, and you could still be discriminated. Because in the end, everybody's different. And if you do stretch out from everyone else, or you are like outside the norm, if you can actually define what norm is to you, what norm may be to some people may not be to others. And you know what? Perfectly understandable. Everybody has their own definition of normal. However, that doesn't necessarily mean it is right for you to ridicule. If there's something you don't understand, try asking questions, but don't ask too many questions. Maybe it's better to just look things up and then seeing for yourself. Huh. Okay. Just think about it. Nobody should really ever be deprived or ostracized just because one looks or thinks differently. I mean, when you think about it, underneath all that, underneath his physical deformity, Augie is a very bright kid. He seems to be pretty good academically, and probably maybe even one of the smartest kids in his classroom. I mean, the guy can actually organically know scientific formulas without really hesitating in looking into a book or not putting much effort. He just seems to just organically know the answers. I wish I had that ability. But no, I have to actually go through hours and hours of looking for information before actually knowing it. Does that make me stupid? No, it makes me determined. But other than that too, his love and passion for things are very much normal from any other average kid. I mean, what kid doesn't like Star Wars? And he loves Star Wars, particularly Boba Fett. And there are a few Star Wars things too. I mean, Augie is obsessed with space, which is why there's a lot of scenes you see him putting on a space helmet. And there's even some cameo appearance from a guy dressed in a Chewbacca costume. Because sometimes because I think his father, Nate, always tells him, whenever you feel uncomfortable, try to pretend you're somewhere other than the current setting you're in. You know, use your imagination. And of course he's putting on a space helmet, because what kid doesn't dream about wanting to be in space? I mean, his bedroom is pretty much like a solar system type place. I mean, he also chats with friends on Minecraft, so there's another normal. I mean, what kid doesn't like Star Wars or Minecraft? Like I said, he seems to be very bright in science, and he also has an eccentric sense of humor and an imagination that gets him through his days. And though the movie seems to be more idealistic as opposed to realistic, it's neither distracting. It's neither distracting or cringe-inducing. Yes, I know it seems more idealistic, his story, Because what kid doesn't dream about, triumphing through school, starting off by being ridiculed, but then taking the bravery to make that transition all the more possible and trying to win the friendship and the respect from his colleagues. And people sometimes think it's more idealistic that when it came to times when he was bullying, that, teachers and principals and his parents would stand up for him. That's kind of like an idealistic approach. In reality, I hate to say this about the education system, but in school, kids tend to not always be so lucky in reality. I mean, bullying seems to be sort of relentless, and it just doesn't just end after a reprimand from a principal. In fact, if you actually report your bullying to a principal, first of all, a teacher or a principal will hardly really ever do anything, and if they do something, the bullying is not going to stop. It just becomes relentless, and it just carries through. That is what the reality is in the education system and when it comes to bullying. Sometimes even teachers just don't do a thing, and that the only time they retaliate is when a victim finally has had enough and goes after and confronts the bully. Then the teachers probably might respond. But instead of blaming the bully, they tend to blame the victim. So then in the end, it's always the victim that gets in trouble and the bully gets away scot-free. I've seen it happen all the time. It has happened to me too, where more often times I would get in trouble and the bully would just walk off. And if you think for 1 second that all bullies are big, dumb, stupid idiots, you're wrong. Sometimes some of the worst bullies can be some of the best academic students going. They're buddies with the principal. They're close associated with a teacher who doesn't think that they're bullying, that they're bullies. But they are. But they could get away with it because they have close ties with a teacher or a principal or somebody else in the school. So they could get away with it. That is just a sad reality. So, yeah, the movie does seem to take more an idealistic curve than it does to a realistic. But don't worry, it won't distract or cringe. And not all victims even come from loving parents. And though I was a bully and I do have loving parents, but they also had reported to the principal or principals the bullying that was taking place, but they wouldn't do very much unless I retaliated. When it came to performances, Jacob Tremblay was absolutely stunning here as Augie, who provides an electrifying blend of kindness and intellect, even when he's hiding his face under a spaceman's helmet. Julia Roberts and Owen Wilson are perfect as the supporting parents who helped Augie on his journey to find social acceptance by those around him. They are the core that holds the story together. And sure, it's great that Julia Roberts and Owen Wilson are kind of like rendered to more supporting roles and yet they've had a history of being more leading role actors. I actually thought it was good that they kind of took a back seat. Even veteran performers like Daveed Diggs and Mandy Patinkin are also taking more of a back seat here. Julia Roberts, as Isabela, seems to always have a special place in Jacob's heart. And, for many years she has homeschooled him. She's even went through great sacrifices to help Augie through his surgeries, while also sacrificing her college education, putting it on hold, because I think she was trying to work on her master's degree in children's illustrations. Owen Wilson, of course, seems to have some highfalutin job, which is the reason why they live in this nice, immaculate-looking brownstone house in New York City. So there's a really, really, really great upbringing for him. And not all kids who are born with physical ailments don't come from well-oiled homes. Some of them come from broken homes and broken families. But at least here we actually see a movie that does not cater towards the broken home and the dysfunctional families, because this family is very well-oiled. And even though I give a lot of praise to Jacob Tremblay, and I've been giving some praise to Julia Roberts and Owen Wilson, I think the real standout in this movie actually comes from, and I think she's just so badly underrated, but I'm going to give her the credit that she deserves, and that is the role of Via, or Olivia, played by Isabela Vidovic as Augie's older sister Via, who also is dealing with issues of her own. Now, of course, this one might probably be overlooked because she doesn't have the Treacher-Collins syndrome. No, she seems to be able-bodied. She seems to be, I guess, a normal-looking girl, albeit kind of introverted. And she still kind of has a bit of that plain Jane in her, although she is still nice-looking. She also has to deal with the situation that a lot of attention in her family comes from Augie because of his condition. So sometimes she has to take a backseat to let her parents look after Augie due to his condition. But it doesn't necessarily mean that she's a complete jealous older sibling, who she also has a lot of love and care for Augie just as well, and is always there for him whenever Augie is in trouble. So she also is always there for him, and that I like, because she could have just played off as a one-dimensional asshole sister, but she's not that at all. And she's also going through her problems. And even though she may not have her brother's medical problem like every other teen, she also has personal problems of her own. And most of it comes from her friend Miranda, played by Danielle Rose Russell. On her first day in high school, I think she's a grade 9 student or something, she is greeted by her friend Miranda, and Miranda has taken a little bit of a makeover. She's now has pink streaks in her brown hair. She's wearing makeup. She's dressing in more trendy clothing. And she also gave Via a brush off. Now, at first you will think that, oh my god, she must be some fucking bitch. But then we also learned that the reason why she was dressing like this, and why she was steering clear from Via, makes you think, okay, so she's not an asshole. Because then we see to a scene where she's actually privately talking to Augie, which makes me think that, okay, so she's not completely detached from the Pullmans, since she seems to still be on good terms and in good connections with Augie. So then we were wondering, like, what's up with Miranda? Well, apparently Miranda has always been jealous of Via because she wished she had a brother like Augie. She wished she also had her kind of home life, with both parents living together on the same roof. living in a brownstone house instead of her switching back and forth between parents and living in a low-rent apartment. There was even a scene where it was Christmas time and she was spending it with the Pullmans, and then took a selfie picture of her seated there, like as if she was an honorary Pullman. And then, of course, there was the scenes where Via was auditioning for a role called Our Town, which has some very similar connections to the movie Wonder, where a whole bunch of characters going through different emotions, very much similar to this movie too. So one of the great things about this movie is that it's not just about Augie, but everybody else. You know, Jack has his own story. Miranda has her own story. Via has her own story. I just wish they probably would have had more stories evolving around Summer Dawson, which was a friend of Augie's. A person who just like Augie's a very shy student. I wish they would have had more development with her as to why she chooses to be a sensitive individual who chooses to be with Augie. I wish there would have been more character development on hers. I wish they would have had more of a story as to why Julian is a bully. We see a little bit of it. If they're gonna make the story center more around kids than adults, okay, maybe we don't need to worry too much about Isabela and Nate's backstory. We don't need to know too much about Principal Tushman's background, even though he's often the epicenter of ridicule just because his last name is Tushman, you know. Even though he likes to sometimes think that that's kind of funny too. But, you know, I mean, I know we don't have time for everyone, but at least we should have had some stories about them too as well. Augie's mother, Isabel, played by Julia Roberts, sacrificed her own career path to look after Augie, and even homeschooled him during his difficult times, which included having 27 surgeries. But now Isabel and Father Nate enroll him at Beecher Rep in a normal class where he will learn to socialize with other students and to adjust outside the sheltered life he's been accustomed to all his life. Though understanding they're doing the right thing, they both know that this new life for him will be a rough road ahead, as Augie will have to deal with bullying, stare-downs, and isolations. And when his parents let him go on his new path in life, all the kids' conversations are stalled as they stare and snicker at him. And it is put to good effect, even though it's not too cringe-inducing or makes you want to just cry. Chbosky sees this as a normal thing, as kids go through those phases, unaware that all through the staring and put-downs, they are hurtful, and it's better to just accept a person for who they are and not what they look like. Because I don't know if these bad-mouthers don't like it when the tables are turned on them. So I think it's just kind of best to just go on with your days, try and be nice to others, and don't be rude. I got no tolerance for rude people, I'm sorry. Like a lot of these underdog stories with an anti-bullying message, the usual stereotyped characters are eventually shoehorned into the narrator. We got the hip, level-headed teacher, Mr. Brown, played by David Diggs, who gives assignments that are both educational and innovative. You have the tough bully named Julian, played by Bryce Ghiesar, who eventually softens up to Augie later in the movie, but really ham-fists his abuse towards him throughout most. Like I mentioned before, there's the introverted girl Summer who becomes his friend. I wish there was more development on her story. It would have been interesting. But I think the best scenes are when Augie befriends an outcast named Jack Will, played by Noah Jupe, who accepts him in spite of working class status. And, it was sad when Jack, behind his back, made fun of him during the Halloween scenes where he was dressed up as Ghostface. But then Jack also realized his mistake, and eventually, at least it's good that at the midway point, they eventually did reconcile their friendship, and I'm glad that everything worked out between the two, because there's a lot of great chemistry between these two actors. They really stood out. What stands out from this movie is that Wonder doesn't just focus on the trials and tribulations of Augie alone. Other characters have their personal dilemmas that are also featured here. Like I mentioned before, the many scenes involving Olivia or Via, a shy teen, Augie's older sister, who meets up with an attractive teen named Justin, played by Nadji Jeter, who they become co-stars in Our Town, and they eventually enroll in a drama club, and they also start to eventually form a relationship. And of course, as I mentioned before, we look into the strained and distant friendship between Via and friend Miranda, who turned against her during the school year, but then she sacrificed her position in a leading role in Our Town and gave it to Via, who was at first her understudy, but then, since Via's parents were there and her parents no-showed, Miranda figured, there's just no point of me going up there if my parents are not going to be there for tonight's show. So, Olivia, it's all yours. Take my role. Which comes as a great sacrifice, even though in the end we kind of still feel bad for her. I don't think anybody really deserves that kind of treatment. But at least it's good to know that Miranda is not completely, horrible. Like in his previous project, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, Chbosky tries to handle the various issues involving teen angst in a very professional and open manner. This kind of measures the audience to try to imagine what it would be like if you were the character or characters who were following in the narrative. Everyone has a problem in life, and at most times it can't be fully solved. And even though Owen Wilson's character Nate might be of comic relief, he does deliver one of the most uplifting quotes in the movie, that being in tears just don't provide sadness, they also provide joy. And you see that in this movie. If there was a weakness in this movie that makes me cringe every time is near the end of the movie, where the climax emanates at the auditorium and Augie gets an award for bravery and courage throughout the school year. I mean, make no question about it. I mean, I'm proud of him that he got that, but it just feels so cliched that the movie has to end with a nice ribbon on top of that. If that's the case, where's my ribbon? Where's my certificate in bravery? Does every kid who has faced problems in school always has to get some kind of special reward for their efforts? Why does that happen all the time? It doesn't have to be like that. You don't have to give some consolation prize just because you've managed to overcome heavy burdens and overcome the hurdles that go through in life in school. Everybody does that. He's not any better or any special. As I said before, he's going to do the same motions as everyone else. Okay, yes, he's got the physical condition. And yes, he is perpetually scarred because of his condition, both physically and psychologically. You don't need to spoon feed us by giving him some kind of a reward for it. If that's the case, every student should probably get at least one. Because everybody goes through that same motion. He's not any different. It would have been okay if he just felt better about himself and didn't need a reward to have a stamp of approval or to prove his point. Which I think is kind of fascist. I mean, you don't necessarily need a trophy to get through in life. And at the end of this movie, he ends up getting it. Am I jealous of him? No. Like I said before, I'm proud of him. I'm glad. He's got something to look up on. If he would have gotten like some kind of a science award, I would have been happy with that. Because it seems like he was pretty good in that. If he would have gotten something for his academic studies, I would have been okay with that. But why does he have to get something where another person who probably may have had the well-deserved qualifications for whatever reward he was getting should have gotten it instead? I just think it's kind of like a tiresome cliche that we all have to bow down to the underdog. I mean, congratulations, Anki. I'm happy for you. You got a lot to be proud of. But, it just does not have to, you just don't have to necessarily have to bring a prize to prove your point. We get it. You struggled. You triumphed. You succeeded. That's all that matters. There's no need for an award for that. So other than the cliched ending, it is a great feel-good movie that delivers a powerful message of acceptance and compassion. And would I highly recommend you guys to see this movie? I certainly would. With all that said and done, if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would give Wonder an 8 out of 10. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead, but just remember the 3 simple rules. Be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I'll be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Writer saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.